sobriété est une bonne habitude.
L'alcool, dans des conditions de consommation excessives, est un facteur de déclenchement d'un certain nombre de pathologies.
L'alcool est une idée qui vous parasite. Ça occupe un espace mental très important et ça, c'est l'enfer.
Tout comme on a totalement accepté que des personnes pouvaient ne pas fumer, ne pas boire devrait être tout aussi normal.
Hello and welcome to France in Focus. The French are known to enjoy a glass or two of wine, but does the country have a troubled relationship with alcohol? The Anti-Cancer League estimates that more than 30% of people here drink excessively. That's 2 glasses of wine per day, more than 5 days a week. And those numbers have gone up since the pandemic. Yet the government's approach to alcohol has been less forceful than with other types of health problems, such as smoking. Indeed, some specialists say that that's down to the power of lobbies within the industry.
Public displays of drunkenness, a time-honoured tradition. In 1873, they were first made punishable by law in France. In the decades to follow, children were taught the evils of drink, but only the distilled kind. Beer, cider, and of course wine were totally fine. In fact, drinking in schools was actively encouraged. It was only in 1956 that booze was banned for children under 14 in school canteens.
Cette mesure salutaire est étendue à la campagne où l'instituteur est tenu de surveiller le choix de la boisson qui accompagne le casse-croûte quotidien. La sobriété est une bonne habitude. Elle est la base même de la santé de nos enfants.
As for the rest of the population, for a long time alcohol restrictions only applied to road safety. From 1970, you were only considered to be drink driving with a blood alcohol content of more than 0.12. That's around 3 drinks for the average French woman and 5 for the average French man. Eventually, this was revised down to today's threshold, 0.05, in 1995. The political turning point had come 4 years earlier, when a new law prohibited adverts for alcohol on TV and in cinemas, while all other ads would be regulated and would carry a health warning. The industry went on the offensive, and eventually the law was softened 5 years ago when MPs voted for an amendment allowing informational communication about alcoholic drinks. In practice, this has meant a whole lot of TV spots showing off the wonders of wine-growing regions.
It completely undermines the Evin law, and it invites a huge influx of advertising investment. As we know, a 10% increase in marketing budgets means a 2.5% increase in consumption.
But still, the lobbying continues, as does the opposition to any price hike on alcohol. In 2019, MPs filed a bill which would allow alcohol sales in stadiums, up until now only permitted through special exemptions. Healthcare professionals, of course, condemn the influence of alcohol companies on the government.
Clearly, the government is trying to reintroduce the alcohol lobby into the financing of sport, particularly with the Olympics and the Rugby World Cup coming up.
Not even the president can resist being pulled into the orbit of the big booze lobby. France's first Dry January campaign took place last year, but government support for it was shut down a few weeks before it launched after Emmanuel Macron met with champagne sector representatives.
We were a dozen of us around the table. We talked about lots of things, including Dry January, which will no longer see the light of day.
It seems the state prefers treating the ill effects of drinking over preventing them, a choice toasted by big business, but a hangover for the healthcare system.
Dr. Fatma Bouvet de la Maisonneuve, you're a psychiatrist and a specialist in addiction. You founded an association to help women specifically to deal with alcohol dependence. Thank you so much for joining me.
Merci.
We'll start with Dry January, a relatively new trend in France that started in the UK a few years ago. The French government doesn't actually actively support the initiative despite high alcohol consumption. In your opinion, is that because of lobbies?
Lobbies have a huge impact. And I also think that the fact that alcohol brings in so much revenue for France is a big part of the reason. It's a shame that lobbies have a bigger platform to defend the supposed benefits of wine in terms of art of living or gastronomy, etc., compared to doctors and health workers. It's really difficult to associate a disease with a product that's marketed with such a positive image.
Ce bien-être et cette image très positive qu'en font les commerciaux, en fait.
Well, in France, recent statistics linked some 50,000 deaths a year to alcohol. Are women at risk in a similar way to men?
Alors, en France, les chiffres...
Here in France, the numbers show that men are more affected by alcoholism than women. The women who are the most concerned by this illness are those who have the most professional responsibilities, the most educated with the most diplomas. It's here where we can really ask ourselves, why is society not adapted to the emancipation of women? To the point where they tell you that they need to regularly drink in order to unwind in the evening, to forget, to numb themselves. This, of course, means that the environment is not conducive to the emancipation of women.
Given the current health climate, how has the COVID-19 pandemic affected people's drinking habits?
It's gotten worse in several ways. Some people started to drink. Others who already had alcohol problems drank even more. Some lived through withdrawal, which is an extremely difficult period. But we mustn't forget that some women took advantage of lockdowns, of finding themselves in a safer environment to recover from the disease. This was possible because they weren't in the violent space that is their workplace anymore.
Well, giving up alcohol entirely in January is a relatively new trend here in France, one that has raised eyebrows in a society that prides itself on its wines, champagnes and spirits. In fact, teetotalers often get a hard time when explaining why they choose not to drink at all.
I don't have a wine cellar, but on the other hand, I have a cupboard filled with tea, and it's well stocked. All this is tea.
Lin doesn't drink alcohol, not even a sip. In addition to being a personal choice, it's a question of taste.
But I don't have a negative vision of alcohol. It's an art to taste wine. I'm happy when my friends talk of fine wines. What I don't like is when people go overboard at parties, when they go beyond their limit and put themselves in impossible situations.
That's what 31-year-old Baptiste experienced. His first tryst with alcohol at parties began when he was 14. And it started a long road down into hell.
This was taken at a party during business school in Marseille. I must have been 21, 22 years old. Thankfully, there was a photo of the evening as a reminder, because I remember nothing of the night.
He consumed alcohol on a daily basis and at all hours of the day over the course of 10 years. At 24, his mother sounded the alarm, and this, for Baptiste, was the trigger. He's been sober for the past 7 years. He documents his struggle on his Instagram account and has written a book.
I want it to become acceptable to say no when it comes to alcohol. I feel it's the only drug that we need to justify when we don't want to take it. We don't need to explain why we don't do cocaine or smoke. Yet we need to explain why we don't drink, because it's associated with our fun side. I like to have fun. We label people who don't drink as bores.
It's a problem Jean-Philippe Brault knows all too well. He runs an e-commerce site selling non-alcoholic beverages, including wines, beers, and even champagne.
Thanks to these products, they can maintain their sociability. There's also the dimension of inclusivity, because they look very similar, except for the fact that there's no alcohol. It's about inclusion, but it's also about standing by the decision not to drink alcohol.
The non-alcoholic beverage market may be small, but it's booming, attracting consumers from various backgrounds.
So, Doctor, there's long been this idea that if you don't drink, you're not fun. Do you think attitudes are changing?
The main reason people drink alcohol is to let themselves go and bring up the courage to approach others. Your question, though, is timely. My colleagues and I have started to notice that young people, at least some of them, are starting to adopt healthy attitudes in life. They work out, they don't do drugs, they don't drink, they try to eat healthy. And I use this as an argument to convince my patients. I tell them, look, there are people who say no, I've decided to take care of my health. You could follow their example. This attitude isn't made fun of or picked apart as much anymore.
Let's talk about treatments now. Since 2014, the drug baclofen has been used to treat alcoholism. How effective would you say this medical approach is?
It's true that a lot has been said about baclofen. I think it's a shame, and I'm not alone. It gave so much hope to patients who thought it would be the miracle drug. Except in addictology, and more specifically in alcohology, there is no one miracle solution. The treatment is global. It's a medical, psychological, social understanding. The main goal is to learn to live without alcohol and to use drugs only as support. There are so many things to do to help patients suffering from alcohol abuse.
Dr. Fatma Bouvet de la Maisonneuve, thank you very much.
Merci à vous.
That's it for this week's edition of France in Focus. Stay tuned to France 24 for more international news.